G'day guys, so here we are out on the road, unless of course iRacing's graphics have increased dramatically. You can probably tell that this is real life. We're outside on a real road in the real world. The reason we're doing that is we're actually heading out to another old racetrack. You might remember my video that I did a little while ago now actually, where I went out to Port Elliot. No, sorry, not Port Elliot. Port Elliot's another track I'm going to cover. It's Port Wakefield, the first closed race circuit in South Australia. Held the Australian Grand Prix, and the ruins are still available out there in amongst the saltbush in a paddock. The land up there just recently sold actually, so not really sure what the future of that area is. So quite glad I managed to get what I got on video, and I'll try and remember to put a link up there so you can check that one out if you want. But we're actually on our way out to a track that was one of the main reasons why Port Wakefield had to exist in the first place, and that is it was known as the Spa of the South. It's the Lobethal circuit. Was really known as South Australia's premier racetrack. It was one of the premier racetracks in the country actually, laid out entirely on public roads, which means that we're able to drive it. We're actually able to drive the full lap of the old racetrack. And this track was used sort of back in the 30s. It held the Australian Grand Prix. It held most of the major racing events, bikes and cars, here in South Australia for a good few years, before it was considered to be too dangerous. And I think maybe even the Le Mans disaster as well of 55 may have had a bit to do with the tightening of the regulations on racing. And they banned racing on public roads, so unfortunately they weren't able to run at Lobethal anymore. But as we say, it's all still there. Lobethal's a town located out in the Barossa wine region sort of area. So it's quite a way out of the city. It's about an hour or so out of Adelaide, in amongst the hills. Not a whole lot has changed in the time. Certainly road-wise, not a lot has changed in the time since the race was held. So we should be able to get a good lap of it in, with a fairly good idea of what it was actually like to race back in the day. So looking forward to it. I have been up here once before to have a bit of a look around. They had a revival one year, it was a good few years ago now, where they got out a whole bunch of classic race cars and actually lapped them around the track, and that was a really good event, really good to see. There hasn't been much about it on since then, so yeah, we'll just go down there, check it out, do a lap, show you a lap, and talk a little bit more about the track, but we'll do that when we get there. Alright guys, so here we are, pretty much on the start-finish line at the 1939 Australian Grand Prix, and many other races throughout the period that it was active. So we're sat here, yeah, just about on the start line. Behind us is a corner, excuse me, known as the Grandstand hairpin, so probably doesn't take a great detective to work out there's probably a grandstand back there at some point. Now, I have in the past come down here and had a bit of a look around, and just to see if there was any kind of anything left over from the racetrack, and there really isn't. I mean, it's a fairly well-maintained area. There's a lot of farmland around, and you know, it may just look like bushland from the road, but they're actually well-maintained farms and so on. So unlikely that there'd be anything here from getting on towards a century ago now. But this is where it all would have started off. The racetrack itself runs around in a big loop, goes back through the actual township of Lobethal. But this is where it all would have started. So we'll take off and go for a bit of a lap. Of course, I'm going to have speed limits to it here too, so I can't let it rip as much as I'd really like to on an old Grand Prix circuit. This really is one of the best racetracks that's ever been in existence. It must be, certainly in Australia. You've kind of got Longford in this one, both inactive now. It is quite a long lap, so depending on how the video turns out, I may just speed up sections of it, just fast forward a little bit, but we'll see how it turns out. Well, anyway, here we are, so sit back and enjoy and try and picture it as it would have been back in the 1930s and early 40s. So we're coming up now to what is the first really big stop of the lap, and you've got to remember that race cars of that era, and bikes and for that matter, they didn't really have a great difference in top speed compared to what racing cars have now. The difference was the braking and the cornering and to a certain extent the acceleration as well. So a lot of these guys would have had to have been setting brake markers for themselves way before they can even see the corner in order to get down to the necessary speed to actually get round the thing. And we're just coming up to that first turn now. So they would have already long been on the brakes. It's not exactly the nicest braking zone here either. Of course, it's actually a roundabout, which I didn't know. This is relatively new, I think. Wasn't here, I don't think, last time, and of course wouldn't have been here at the time of the track. But certainly the lead up to this corner, you know, you've got rises and falls in the track and bends and so on, and they would have been braking all of that time. And it would have been great trying to settle down a car like that with so many elevation changes and so on. But yeah, provided you make it through there, you've now got another really decent acceleration zone up the hill here that you can see across the bridge, and then we go up around a couple of bends and actually into the town of Lobethal itself. So this section here is a little bit of a twistier section. It's actually my favourite part of the track. As you wind down, you go up a little bit, and then you drop down into the actual township of Lobethal itself. Would have been a fantastic area to watch from, I think, and certainly a fantastic area to actually race through, either on a car or a motorbike. Sidecars even, they used to race through here. But you can imagine getting airborne across there if you're not careful and carrying way too much speed into this section. You can see you're just descending now. There's just a whole bunch of sort of medium to slow corners. And that one there is banked very much in your favour. Then of course you've got another drop and you would be on the brakes again, just coming through this turn here. I reckon that'll be a great section of road. Now we've actually got a T-junction here and a bit of give way, but of course that wouldn't have been the case for the race cars. Would have just been able to come flying through here, right angle corner onto the main street of the township itself. And this is where the bulk of people would have been. If you can imagine what it was like, they would have had, I think they had around about 40,000 people here, maybe even more. And most of them, you imagine the majority of them probably would have been here in the township as the cars actually race through the township. I can't imagine, I mean sure a few of the buildings are different and so on, but I can't imagine in terms of the overall look of the place that it's changed that much since the time the cars actually raced through here. So it's quite a good picture if you can sort of cast your mind back to think of what it would be like. So many people just lining the streets here, really nothing in the way of barriers, maybe a couple of hay bales or something to keep the crowd safe, if that. But yeah, certainly the flying through here would have been something to witness. Naturally, I'm going to get caught behind a bus. We did have a reasonably clear lap up to now, but good news is he's turning off, so that's excellent. Otherwise I would have waited, let him get away a little bit. You're not going to learn much about the layout of the track staring at the arse end of a bus. Alright, so it's actually coming out of the township now. We've just got a few houses here and what would have been, I guess, a reasonably quick sort of bend, as much as you could on those very skinny tyres that they used to run. But now we're really out of the township itself and we're onto the stretch which heads back down towards Grandstand hairpin. It's actually a really fast section, but you can't imagine that the cars of the day were really ever settled across it, because there's lots of corners like this that we've just gone round where there's elevation and everything else. So you imagine that the cars of the time certainly would have been, you know, very unstable heading through this section. But of course you've got to keep your foot down if you're going to be fast. So I imagine it was one of the big ball sections of the track, I suppose. So here we are approaching the old Grandstand hairpin. and the start-finish line is just round this corner. So this would have been the last corner of the lap and the last corner of the race. They would have been on the brakes a lot earlier than I was there, going a lot faster with a lot worse brakes. I just round this hairpin here, and we are back to where we started. Across the line. So there we are, the Spa of the South, the one of the greatest racetracks, in my opinion, anywhere that's ever existed. I reckon it would have been absolutely fantastic to see back in the day, but unfortunately those days behind us, and yeah, certainly not a racetrack you'd ever get permission for today. I think you get laughed out of the room if you tried to even propose it. So anyway, hope you enjoyed the lap, hope you enjoyed the little bit of a history lesson, and we'll see you next time.